eminent domain is often used against people, but the fact is that it's a law that can be used on our behalf if we're the controlling element. So what I'm talking about is, for example, in places where you have abandoned property, or you have speculators that are sitting on stuff, a progressive government could seize that land in the name of economic development. And there's a Supreme Court decision of just the last few years, I forgot the actual site, that says that it can be done, right? It was not done. Sorry?
Hilo
versus the city of New London.
Okay, so it wasn't done in something that was in our interest, but it basically sets the precedent. So that's what I was trying to get at. Let me just say something about this Obama thing for a minute, about why it matters and why it doesn't matter. Why it matters to me and why I mention it is that there was an immense amount of magical thinking that people engaged in leading up to the race, the election. That's my concern. And I would argue that magical thinking is directly related to why people did almost nothing after he was elected. Because masses of people were expecting that he was going to wave the wand in one way or another once he came in. I mean, this is a man who gives speeches unlike any other mainstream politician. He is captivating, he is smart, he is engaging, and people loved him, and still do. And so the problem is that liberals and progressives, in many cases, in my humble opinion, sat back and waited for him to deliver. There's a psychology that exists in the US electorate, which is you vote and then you go home, right? You don't do anything more. You vote, you let someone prove themselves or disprove themselves, and then at the next election, either you stay home or you come out and maybe vote against them, right? So the problem of our inability or unwillingness to put the pressure on created this immense hole that the right was able to walk into. That's my argument. And so in that sense, I'm actually more critical of liberals and progressives than I am of Obama. Because the thing about Obama is I knew where he was standing before the election. This is someone, I would argue to you, who made a decision not to become a leftist. Now by that I mean there's some people that, they sort of just evolve in a certain way, right? They did this and that, and they just kind of slowly, move to the right? No, this guy made a decision at some point that he wasn't going to be a leftist, but he knows the language. He made a decision, and he made a decision to align himself with corporate America, and he represents, as Joy was saying, a certain political moment that we're in with the Democratic Party. That was all evident before November 2008. We should not have expected anything different short of putting the pressure on. Now, I do believe that the pressure matters. And my proof is what we're witnessing in Wisconsin. I would put $1 to a donut that not one of those Democratic senators would have left town, let alone left the state, had it not been for mass pressure. Right? There was mass pressure, and they realized they had to get up out of town. And that is the example that we need to be thinking about. It's not one or the other. It's about how do we leverage mass pressure, how do we put the pressure on to force certain kinds of reforms, even from people who may not be strategic allies. They don't have to agree with us on everything. The question is whether we're in agreement at the moment on certain key things and can get them to do the right thing. So that relates in some ways to this issue about a Labor Party. I'm not going to dwell on it. My position is that the conditions, that it's a wonderful idea in a completely different electoral system. And if I could close my eyes, click my heels 3 times, and we had a different electoral system, I'd say let's rock and roll. The reality is we have a very well-crafted electoral system that has been created in such a way to discourage the emergence of alternative parties. And the problem problem of many of us on the left is that we wish we were in Australia. We really do. We wish that we were in Australia or in Italy, where there was a different electoral system. They ain't. Get over it. The question is, what do we do about the concrete reality of this electoral system, and how do we lay the foundation for a possible political realignment that may at some point lead to some sort of new progressive party? We don't want to do that. We'd rather roll up the flag, see how many people salute, feel good about it, feel good that we were audacious, that we said, damn it, what we believed in. Doesn't matter that we don't have any power. What the hell does that matter? We've at least had a chance to run our mouths, right? The question is, if we're interested in power, what's our strategy? Not what do we want in an ideal world in terms of organization, but what is our strategy to get there? And in that regard, I think that saying that we need a Labor Party is both a truism, but it's also irrelevant to the moment, right? Of course we need a party of the working class. Of course we need a party that would lead working people to bring about a fundamental change. I'm not just talking about electoral change, but a fundamental change in the system. Of course we need that. But in terms of the electoral motion at the moment, where are the masses? What can we do at this moment? How can we move and reposition? That's what I think that we've got to really focus on, and I think that that's what the whole notion of strategy is about, and why strategy and vision is very important. But if you don't have vision, if you don't have strategy, and you just have vision, then you have dreams. And I'm as much into dreaming as the next person, but I want to see something change. The question about the economic assault, I can only, that question itself could be enough for an entire forum. So I'm not going to do justice to it. Except that I'm just going to say it in broadly outlining that poll after poll was showing in late 2010 that somewhere in the mid-50s to mid-60% of the population did not want the Bush tax cuts extended. And that was ignored. But it's very important because it tells us that despite the fact that people can be very uneven and vacillating, there's a basis for us to move an alternative economic approach, which I caution you, we're not going to win right now. But we've got to be putting the pressure from the left, particularly on this issue of revenue. You know, even some of the things that non-socialists like Krugman and Stiglitz have been raising are very important to enter into this dialogue at this moment, because what's happened with Fox News and others is that they've been able to shift the discourse so that people, even though most people, the priority issue is jobs, at this moment the second issue is the deficit. And people have been, they have been whipped into believing that that is the problem that needs to be resolved right now. So I think that the central thing you've got to be pushing is an alternative economic approach, looking at this issue of revenue, particularly the issue of taxes, particularly the issue of focusing on the rich, and identifying who the rich is. And I would even go further. In many organizing campaigns, one of the best things you can do is literally give a picture of somebody, just like a regular person. You know, so it's not like Unite Here Local X, but it's, you know, Mary Smith, who is working in this particular restaurant. We have to, what do the Koch brothers look like? Now, I'm not talking about putting some, you know, I'm not trying to say put a bullseye on them. I'm saying, but what do they look like? What is their life like? I mean, we've got to make this real for regular people. What are these people up to? I mean, what's the relationship of the Koch brothers to the John Birch Society? I mean, we've got to make this real. And I think that and articulating this economic approach is one of the most important things that we can do right now. There's not a particular piece of legislation that I recommend, but being in a union that will be directly affected by a government shutdown, I'll say that one of the discussions that's going on is to make government real to regular people. Because what the right has been able to do is to use this notion of big government as a broad brush to kind of cover all types of things that people are pissed off about. But when you ask people, well, do you want to get rid of food safety inspection? No. Do you want to close the VA? No. Right? What about housing? No. Et cetera, et cetera. Right? So we've got to make it concrete. But there's one other piece that was almost completely out of the discussion in November and hasn't been discussed much since. This little place called Afghanistan.
Thank you.
And the whole issue of the war, and see, it's not just about military expenditures. We've got to be focused. Iraq and Afghanistan, and Lord help us if they decide, if the Israelis decide to attack Iran and try to draw us in, right? But we've got to talk about Iraq and Afghanistan. When Gates made the statement, you probably heard it the other day, about, well, yeah, we're supposed to leave this year, but if the Iraqi government asks us, we'd be duty-bound to stay. That got me very nervous.
They're not planning to go.
So we've got to really be talking about the relationship between the war and debt and the deficit. And we've got to be hammering, and we've got the public on our side on this one. But we don't have political leaders, many political leaders at least. There's Barbara Lee and the Kuciniches, but we don't have enough that are out there speaking on this or that feel, see, this is where they need to feel the heat. We need to once again have the kind of movement that just like these folks, the Democratic senators in Wisconsin, felt like they had a reason to leave town because there was a mass base. We've got to rebuild that kind of sentiment.